Welcome to Coyote's Corner. This episode, we'll be listening to Papa Joe tell his interpretation of a Russian folktale, Jack Frost.
Once upon a time, there was a little old man with fuzzy white hair. He had a little girl with a smile on her face. She always had a smile on her face. And in that house, there also lived an old woman with a hard heart. She had a little girl with a frown on her face. And that girl always had a frown on her face. And in that house, there also lived a three-legged dog named Tasha Tripod. Now the old man with the fuzzy white hair, little girl with the smile on her face, they were always nice, they were always polite, they always said please, they always said thank you, and they never forgot to say you're welcome. But the old woman with the hard heart and the little girl with the frown on her face, they were never nice, they were never polite, they never said please, they never said thank you, and they certainly never said you're welcome. And the old woman with the hard heart, she didn't like the little girl with the smile on her face, was always trying to get rid of her. Then one day, she had an evil idea. Turned to the man with the fuzzy white hair, said, old man, I found a husband for your daughter. He's handsome, and he's rich, and he's nice, so she'll like him. All you have to do is take her out to the deep, deep woods. Leave her under the old fir tree. He'll come and get her. But take away her hat, take away her coat, take away her mittens. He's going to bring her some new clothes, and he doesn't want to see her old rags. Well, the old man with the fuzzy white hair, he took the little girl with the smile on her face out to the barn. They hooked up the sleigh, drove it out to the deep, deep woods. And he left her under the old fir tree with no hat, with no coat, with no gloves. Do you think she was cold? She sure was. But she still had a smile on her face. She always had a smile on her face. Now when the sun went down, who came around? Jack Frost. Leaping from tree to tree to tree, he saw the little girl with a smile on her face sitting underneath the old fir tree. He said, curiouser and curiouser. And he leaped on over to the old fir tree, sat down right at the top, called out, little birdie, little birdie, are you cold? Do you think she was cold? Well, she was so cold, with Jack that close, her breath came out like ice cubes. But she didn't want to be rude or impolite. She knew that Jack was sad and lonely, so she said, oh, Jack, I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Jack was surprised. No one ever talked to him like that. In fact, mostly they just ran away. He said, curiouser and curiouser. I'll have to take a closer look. And he slid. Halfway down that tree, called out, little birdie, little birdie, are you cold? Do you think she was cold? Well, with Jack Frost that close, she was so cold her hair had frosted white. And still she tried to be polite. She said, oh, Jack, I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Jack said, curiouser and curiouser. I'll have to take a closer look. And he slid down to the bottom branch, called out, little birdie, little birdie, are you cold? Do you think she was cold? Well, she was so cold with Jack that close, she was covered in a layer of ice. And still she tried to be nice. Oh, Jack, I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Well, Jack knew she wasn't fine. He could see she was about to freeze to death, and that made him sad. so sad. His heart almost melted. Not a good thing for Jack Frost. So off comes Jack's magic cloak, and down around her shoulders it goes, and then her cheeks are so red. This cozy red. Well, the little girl with the smile on her face and Jack Frost, they talked all night. And just before the sun came up, off goes Jack Frost from tree to tree to tree to tree. Now the next morning, the old woman with the hard heart, she wakes up, goes in the kitchen, starts making pancakes. You like pancakes for breakfast? Well, in those days, in that place, people only had pancakes for breakfast if somebody died. So when the old man with the fuzzy white hair woke up, went into the kitchen, saw the old woman making pancakes, he said, old woman, who died? She said, I think it was the girl with the smile on her face. Now it's a frozen smile on her face. Well, the old man with the fuzzy white hair, he was so upset, he was so afraid, he ran out to the barn, he hooked up the sleigh, drove it out to the deep, deep woods to get his little girl. And the old woman kept making pancakes. When into the kitchen came the three-legged dog, Tasha Tripod, howling and singing, howl, 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 old man's daughter's trimmed in gold. Howl, howl, howl. Old man said, Doggy, I don't like that song. I don't like what you're singing. I want you to sing, Old Man's Daughter is Frozen Cold. But Tasha wouldn't sing that. She sang, howl, 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 old man's daughter's trimmed in gold. Howl, howl, howl. Old man said, Doggy, I said don't sing it like that. Now if you sing it my way, I'll give you a pancake. She gave Tasha the pancake. Tasha gobbled it up. But what did she sing? Howl, 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 old man's daughter's trimmed in gold. Howl, howl, howl. Old man said, Doggy, I said don't sing it like that. Now if you don't sing it my way, I'm gonna kick you. Well, Tasha wouldn't sing it her way, and the old woman couldn't kick her. Every time she tried, Tasha just went somewhere else. Round and round the house they ran, round and round until they heard sleigh bells. Old man coming back from the deep, deep woods. Old woman said, oh, goody, now I get to see that frozen little girl. She ran to the door, opened it wide, and wasn't she surprised to see the little girl with the smile on her face, wrapped up all roosty-toasty, warm in a beautiful fur cloak, which was all trimmed in gold. Old man said, Girlie, where'd you get that cloak? So the little girl with the smile on her face told her all about Jack Frost. Old woman said, well then, tonight it's going to be my little girl out there, and she's going to get a better cloak than you. Think that's true? Later on that day, the old man with the fuzzy white hair took the little girl with the frown on her face. Out to the barn they hooked up the sleigh, drove it out to the deep, deep woods. He left her under the old fir tree. But she had a warm hat. She had a warm coat. She had warm mittens. Do you think she was cold? Oh, no, she wasn't. But she still had a frown on her face. She always had that frown on her face. And when the sun went down, who came around? Jack Frost, leaping from tree to tree to tree to tree. He saw the little girl with a frown on her face sitting underneath the old fir tree. He said, curiouser and curiouser, looks like more fun. And he leaped on over to the old fir tree, sat down right at the top, called out, little birdie, Are you cold? Do you think she was cold? Oh, yes. With Jack Frost that close, she was so cold her breath came out like ice cubes. But she wasn't nice, and she wasn't polite, and I probably shouldn't even tell you what she said. But, of course I'm cold. Are you stupid, little man? What did you expect? Well, Jack didn't like that at all. And he slid halfway down that tree, called out, "Little birdie! Little birdie! Are you cold?" Do you think she was cold? Well, she was so cold with Jack that close. Her hat had frozen on her head. She should have been nice, but instead she said, "Of course I'm cold. You are stupid, little man." And Jack didn't like that either. He slid down to the bottom branch, called out, "Little birdie! Little birdie! Are you cold?" Do you think she was cold? Well, she was so cold with Jack that close, she was covered in a layer of ice. Now she didn't have to be nice. She just needed to be quiet. But she couldn't even do that. She said, "Of course I'm cold, you stupid little Dan. Just get in that cloak and get out of here." And Jack Frost stepped right out of the tree, walked up to the girl with the frown on her face, and he touched her right on the nose, turned her into a popsicle. Then up the tree went Jack Frost, and away from tree to tree to tree to tree to tree. Now the next morning, the old woman with the hard heart, she went to the room of the little old man with the fuzzy white hair, went over to him, started shaking him back and forth. Old man, wake up! Get out to the barn, hook up the sleigh, get out to the deep, deep woods and get my little girl. I want to see her new cloak." So the old man with the fuzzy white hair, he went out to the barn, he hooked up the sleigh, drove it out to the deep, deep woods. And the old woman went in the kitchen, started making, not pancakes, anything but pancakes. She made waffles and sausage and bacon and eggs and home fries. She made blueberry muffins, everything but pancakes. When into the kitchen came the three-legged dog, howling and singing, "Howl, howl, howl! Old man's daughter's trimmed in gold. Old man's daughter is frozen cold. Howl, howl, howl." Old man said, "Doggy, I don't like that song you're singing. I want you to sing, 'Old man's daughter's got a grubby little cloak and my daughter's got a beautiful one.'" But Tasha wouldn't sing that. She sang, "Howl, howl, howl! Old man's daughter's trimmed in gold. Old woman's daughter is frozen cold. Howl, howl, howl." Old man said, "Doggy, I said don't sing it like that. Now, if you sing it my way, I'll give you some sausage." She gave Tasha the sausage. Tasha gobbled it up. But what did she sing? "Howl, howl, howl! Old man's daughter's trimmed in gold. Old woman's daughter is frozen cold. Howl, howl, howl." Old woman said, "Doggy, I said don't sing it like that. If you don't sing it my way, I'm gonna kick you." Well, Tasha wouldn't sing it her way, and she couldn't kick her, because every time she tried, Tasha just went somewhere else. Round and round the house they ran, round and round until They heard sleigh bells. Old man coming back from the deep, deep woods. Old woman said, "Oh, goody! Now I get to see my daughter's new cloak!" She ran to the door, opened it wide, and wasn't she sad to see the little girl with the frown on her face, frozen into a popsicle. Well, the old woman with the hard heart, she ran out to the sleigh, reached for her daughter, and that ice traveled up her arms and froze her too. Old man set 'em up on the snowbank. They didn't thaw out till spring. But the old man with the fuzzy white hair, little girl with a smile on her face, and of course the Tasha tripod, they lived happily ever after. The end.
That was Papa Joe telling Jack Frost. Michael Lang sat down with Papa Joe to get some background on that story and get some background on Papa Joe himself. We'll listen to that interview now.
Well, thank you, Papa Joe, for coming in and sharing that story on Coyote's Corner. Where did that story come from?
Well, Jack Frost is actually Grandfather Frost, and it is an old Russian tale.
Really?
There's, of course, versions around the world.
Right, every story.
But it was a story that I've been hearing all my life. I mean, when I was a child, I would hear it occasionally. But I always would tell it in the wintertime because it's such a good seasonal story.
Sure,
and
yeah.
I had a real problem with my tellings because, sticking with the standard wording, it was always a translation from Russian into English,
Right.
The literary style story. And I, much as I worked on it, I really never felt comfortable with how I told it. People liked the tellings, but I wasn't really right, which is a big thing for me.
Well, if you don't like the story, how can you tell it well?
Right. Well, I liked the story. I just didn't like my telling.
Sure.
Until I went, my kids said, "Come on, we want to go see the movie." And I said, "What movie?" And they said, "It's called Nightmare Before Christmas."
Ah, yes.
Wow. When I came home from Nightmare from Christmas, I sat down and worked out that story and pretty much have stayed that way since.
Really?
So whatever year Nightmare from Christmas came out, that's when I started telling Jack Frost like that.
What did you add to the story that came from?
Well, it was the rhythm. And,
okay, yeah.
Jack the Pumpkin King.
Yes.
The way he moved, and it just inspired
You had that image in your head.
Right. Because basically that's how I perceived Grandfather Frost. And so I just named him Jack and made him Jack Frost. At the time, there weren't a lot of people using Jack Frost. I mean, Jack Frost nipping at your nose.
Right.
It wasn't the other movies that in shows that have come out since that time.
Disney stories that kind of portray him. So how long have you been telling stories, Papa Joe?
Well, I remember telling stories to my little brother since he's 50 now. It's been a long time.
Right.
And when I was a teenager, I worked as a child companion, which is not a babysitter because
Right.
I was a boy and I was not going to be a babysitter. But I worked as a child companion, and I would tell stories to them. And even as an older teenager, when I would be visiting my girlfriend, if they were kids around, I'd tell stories.
Sure.
So, I mean, I've been doing it all my life.
Really,
My
really
mother
well.
was a storyteller. And that's where I learned maybe half of the stories that I tell regularly are her stories that I learned on her knee, pretty much.
Was she the one who first introduced you to this story, or was that...
No, not Jack Frost.
Okay.
I think Jack Frost came from the libraries. I
Okay.
also visited every library story time I could.
Sure.
In fact, I resented going to kindergarten because it meant that I had to drop out of the library club. I had morning kindergarten and library club met in the
Same time.
mornings. And my sister Gail, who's the next kid down, she went to afternoon kindergarten, so she got to stay in the library club, and I thought that was just unfair.
Completely unfair. Absolutely.
But as far as professional storyteller, I started telling in the mid-'80s. I got asked if I could do some entertaining at some children's parties. I played recorder. Somebody had picked up on that and thought that I would be an excellent person to do some other things.
Right.
And when they asked me what else I do, I said, well, I tell stories. They went, great, you're going to be the Pied Piper at our children's parties. So I started doing that. And
Yeah.
I was also going to school at the time. it was called SLL, School for Lifelong Learning. It's now Granite State.
Okay, yeah.
But back then, way back in the 80s, it was SLL, and there was a class listed for storytelling, which I
Really?
thought was really interesting. Marge Chastain was doing a program for the librarians, and I got into that class, and that was, I guess, around 87.
Wow.
And that introduced me to the community, the storytelling community,
Right.
which was just an amazing thing and pretty much changed my life.
Yeah.
At that point, I became a full-time professional storyteller, and I've made most of the money ever since through telling stories.
And you're still today a big part of that local community, right?
Yeah. I'm actually the membership chair at the New Hampshire Storytelling Alliance, and I belong to several circles. I've just started a new one in Peterborough
That's
called
right.
the Monadnock Storytelling Circle, and of course I'm one of the original members of the Seacoast Storytellers.
You sort of travel around to all of them most months.
I as often as
When
I
you
can get to
can,
them,
right.
but I also go across the border to Massachusetts once in a while to visit the Andover Tellers, which was actually the town I was born in. My father was born in Andover, Massachusetts. I was born there too, but I've been in New Hampshire most of my life.
Right.
I've lived here since I was 12.
Okay.
And we camped here a lot before then. We had a piece of property in Fremont that we would live in whenever we weren't in school until we were 12. And then when 1970, we moved here full time.
Well, Papa Joe, thank you so much for coming in and sharing Jack Frost with us, and for talking a little bit about your storytelling life and about the origins of the story as well.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It was great to tell stories with you, Mike.
That was Michael Lang sitting down with Papa Joe to talk about his story, Jack Frost. If you want to hear more from Papa Joe, check out his website at papajoestorytelling.com or look him up on Facebook, Papa Joe Storytelling. To our audience out there, thank you so much for tuning in to Coyote's Corner. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and favorite so you never miss a minute of what's going on here. Until next time, this has been Coyote's Corner.